Alrighty, everyone. It is Tuesday, August 12th, 2025. I am Michael Winkler, and this is the Mike Wink Show. Yeah, my understanding was Trump wants a new census to try and skew the results of the next election. We'll see what this article has to say about it. On Thursday, President Donald Trump announced on Truth Social that he is ordering the Commerce Department to work on a new census that would exclude persons who are illegally in our country illegally. Nice typo. It's often difficult to know from a social media post what Trump intends, but the president seems to be asking for a mid-decade census and would not count undocumented immigrants. There are just two problems with that idea. It is unconstitutional and it is logistically impossible. Yeah, my understanding is that the census is like an incredibly large undertaking that takes hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to actually fully flesh out. And so the idea that Trump can just unilaterally be like, yeah, we're just going to have another census. Yeah, whatever. Let's just do it now. And the idea of funding or the logistics or anything else that goes behind putting on a census isn't actually considered at all. It's just well, I just want a census, guys. Almost like it's like picking up a candy bar at the local store. Oh, can you grab me a candy bar when you're over there? Oh yeah, let's just do another census real quick, guys. No problem. The census of the U.S. population has many uses. Federal and state governments allocate money to communities based on their populations. Businesses use population forecasts to make decisions on where to expand. Law enforcement uses population counts to calculate crime rates and inform policing decisions. Health officials use the data to calculate disease rates to know where outbreaks occur and to send help. But Trump's idea concerns the census's effect on political power. The federal government allocates congressional seats to states, which draw equal population congressional and other districts using census population numbers. The most reasonable interpretation of the president's missive is that he wants to affect the 2026 midterm elections. After all, Trump is pushing this amid the drama surrounding Texas redistricting efforts. There, Democratic state legislatures have fled the state to deny Republicans a quorum needed to adopt a new congressional map, with the intended effect to tilt the table slightly towards the GOP in what will most likely be a challenging 2026 election environment. I agree. So, if you're not super deep into politics and haven't followed what Trump has been doing over the last however many years, you might see this sentence that says the most reasonable interpretation of the president's missive is that he wants to affect the 2026 midterms and be like, oh man, I don't know, that's pretty cynical. I don't know if I would, if I would be quite that cynical, if I would have that outlook on it. That's a pretty hard outlook to have. But within the context of what he tried to do to overthrow the 2020 election results, the whole fake slate of electors theme in Georgia and whatnot, I mean, that is because of all of that. This is the only reasonable interpretation of that. If he never did all of that, then you could have some level of plausible deniability about the reasoning behind why he would want to do this sort of thing. But because of he tried to steal the 2020 election, because he tried the fake elector scheme, because he tried to get Mike Pence to just put him in, just say he won, even though he didn't win. I think the only reasonable interpretation about the reasoning behind why he wants to do this is the fact that he wants to cynically sway the results of the upcoming 2026 midterms, and likely the 2028 general election. A new census, similarly, would result in a different allocation of congressional seats to the states and another round of redistricting throughout the country. Yet it is difficult to know with certainty how excluding undocumented immigrants would affect population counts, since the Census Bureau does not ask about people's legal status. The conventional wisdom, and presumably the president's view, is that these people largely reside in Democratic areas, meaning these communities would be adversely affected. Yeah, there's no good faith, reasonable reason why. As this article points out, the U.S. Census numbers are not exclusively for redistricting and political purposes, right? They're used for all sorts of other things, right? As the article says, businesses use population forecasts to make decisions on where to expand. Well, of course, illegal people who are here illegally still spend money and still solicit businesses in whatever area they happen to live in. I mean, they exist, they do things, they're a part of society. So in that sense, these businesses want those numbers to be accurate to the amount of people that are there that could, solicit their business, including illegals. Same thing goes for how the law enforcement uses population counts to calculate crime rates and inform policing decisions. Obviously, undocumented and illegal immigrants commit crime as well, right? The rate, my understanding is that they commit crimes at a much lower rate than native born American citizens. But put that aside entirely for a second. Of course, some percentage of, illegal and undocumented people are going to commit crime, just because just any group of any people, some percentage of them is going to commit crime. And so in that sense, you want to have an accurate count of whoever's here legally and illegally, insofar as it affects how law enforcement and, the amount of resources they need to allocate, how much policing they need to do, how much patrolling, yada, yada, all the details. And same thing goes for the health officials that use the data to calculate disease rates and know where outbreaks occur and to send help. What if we have another COVID type pandemic outbreak, and then the census numbers are all screwed up? And then, it's not going to I don't know if it would completely upend our ability to deal with something like that, but I worry that it would definitely negatively influence our ability. We would necessarily under or over count the amount of deaths or disease rate or the spread or the risk of the spread in certain areas, because our census numbers would be all off, because our understanding of exactly how many real human beings, not illegal or legal people, how many human beings that could be vectors for disease or crime or solicitors of local businesses or whatever, how are they affected? They are an important part of the societal equation. And insofar as census is a long-term planning tool, you want it to be as comprehensive and as detailed as possible, including illegal and undocumented people. And so the fact that he's doing all of this to try and get more GOP, he's doing this, Trump wants to do this for purely political reasons, right? He wants the GOP to have more seats. He wants, like it said, he wants the conventional wisdom is that these people are largely reside in Democratic areas, meaning these communities would be adversely affected. Basically, the idea is that they're going to undercount these areas, and so therefore the census will reallocate the amount of congressional seats that go to each state or whatever, and then they get to redraw all the districts and then basically gerrymander their way into having more seats in the House. But yeah, the fact that the whole idea of this, what are the pros and cons, right? The pros from their perspective are very clear, right? The gerrymandering, they get extra seats in the House, they get extra power and control over the government. The pros are very clear for them, all right? The cons are non-existent because they're the people in power, they're the ruling class. They don't care about, the adverse effects of a bad census, and the knock-on effects that it can have. But those are undeniably factual cons, right? This necessarily will happen, right? If we do a census recount that within this context, then it will necessarily create a scenario in which Republicans gerrymander and gain seats at the expense of the practical societal logistics and whatnot that the census provides to people. There are real legitimate cons to all of this, but the fact that they don't care about any of that. They don't care about the American people. They're not coming at this from a good faith perspective, but it's just a different perspective, right? They're coming at this from pure cynicism, from pure power grab, from pure metagame analysis perspective. What can we do to maximize our control? Bar none. We don't care. This is why I keep coming back to, I don't think the Republican Party cares very much about PR anymore, or at least it's not so much the Republican Party doesn't care about PR, but it's that the era of people caring about PR and that kind of thing seems to be gone, right? I would think that 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, even the Republican Party, even the base of the Republicans probably understood why the census was done exactly the way it is, right? No, I'm not exactly sure about that. I mean, people were stupid back then too. I just worry that we have such extreme media saturation at this point that the ability for people to make these connections, to see on one hand, oh, they're just trying to cynically do this to gerrymander and gain seats at the expense of all these other things. But people, there's such a deep media saturation that coming to that conclusion, making that analysis and that connection requires the media to be presenting things to you correctly, requires you to be getting the correct inputs information wise. But because they're so saturated with so much BS media that people are not getting the correct, most of people are not getting the correct inputs, and therefore they're not going to be able to make this connection. And therefore this sort of thing, which I think would ostensibly be bad PR and just be an objectively bad decision, because you're clearly cynically trying to use the levers of government in the way that elections are run and whatnot in the census to cynically give yourself more power with no plausibly deniable other reason, right? I don't know. It's so brazen and just so lazy. And like, they aren't even trying to hide the ball with it. Not even a little bit. Regardless of which districts are affected, asking for a new census does not magically create one. That's what I'm saying. The logistics behind a census are tremendous. It's the idea that you just ask for one or say that we're going to have another one, and then it's just going to happen, and then everything else falls in line, and that there's no other no other work beyond that that needs to be done is just ridiculous. Congress has to appropriate money. With red states and members representing red districts affected, it is unclear there are even enough votes to pass enabling legislation. And this is before Republican-aligned organizations like business and law enforcement groups pressure Republican members of Congress to provide reliable population counts that would be jeopardized by the redistricted resources needed to conduct a slapdash census. That's it. Yes, this is exactly what I'm saying, right? This causes a number of knock-on effects. The census is more than just for redistricting, and that even in the Republican districts that ostensibly are benefiting from this sort of gerrymandering are going to be negatively affected by all the cons. Then the Census Bureau has to design and conduct a census, planning, hiring, and training tens of thousands of census takers, and tabulating the collected numbers takes time. Indeed, we know how much time is required since the Census Bureau is already planning when it will next conduct a census in 2030. Even in the extremely unlikely scenario Congress would appropriate money for the Census Bureau, could produce new population counts, states would still need to draw new districts, and these new districts would have to be in place before 2025 primaries candidate filing deadlines, which are months away. So yeah, it's 100% not going to come together in time. No way. The speed at which this legislature moves when it comes to detailed things like this, there's no way. The barriers to conducting a sweeping mid-decade redistricting before the 2026 elections are just simply insurmountable. Most likely is that Trump intends to affect how the 2030 census is conducted, and there is enough lead time to change that census. However, Trump's proposed change to exclude undocumented immigrants, whatever year the census is conducted, is unconstitutional. Section 2 of the 14th Amendment clearly states that congressional seats are to be appropriated by the whole number of persons in each state. Yeah, okay. That seems completely uninterpretable, right? That seems extremely clear. It's not like the Second Amendment where it's got that clause in it where it's like a well-regulated militia, and then you and your homies can debate whether that the founding fathers really meant like your average everyday person can have a gun, or like the militias should have access to arms or whatever. That is a reasonable like difference of interpretation of the wording that people can come to. But when it says the whole number of persons in each state, there is no way that you could legally interpret that to be like, oh, but only the legal persons, right? Not the undocumented persons, not the people who are here illegally, right? There's no way. And there's no way that they're going to get an amendment overturned. That's of course not going to happen. And so, yeah, the idea that this is going to happen is, I just don't see this happening. This seems just like a pipe dream. Trump's directive will be litigated, which poses yet another logistical barrier. The Supreme Court has sided with Trump on high-profile cases that consolidate his presidential power. Like Trump, it is difficult to read the minds of the 6 conservative justices. Still, these justices will have a difficult time dismissing the Constitution's plain language. Yeah, this perfectly exemplifies how I would describe my feelings on this, right? Like, yeah, there's no way that they could possibly interpret this amendment and this piece of legislation in this sort of way. But on the other hand, these justices have proven to be absolute lunatics and complete Trump sycophants. So it's kind of all up in the air, right? Things that we thought were kind of obvious in the legal realm have turned out not to be obvious when it comes to the Supreme Court. So I don't know. You never know. If I were to guess what would happen, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick will order the Census Bureau to explore adding a question to the 2030 census asking for people's legal status in the country. Congress may still need to pass enabling legislation, since adding a question is costly. Some people are already fearful to respond to the census, which leads to undercounts of immigrant communities. The addition of a legal status question would further deter their willingness to participate. In this scenario, the legal questions about using the data for apportionment and redistricting would be cans to be kicked down the road until the next president releases the population counts of the 2030 census. It would only be then that population counts could be used to apportion congressional seats to states and for redistricting. Advocacy groups representing immigrant communities would still most likely file lawsuits, though alleging the addition of the status question negatively affects participation in the decennial census, thereby undermining the federal government's 14th Amendment mandate. Just because the president says he wants an immediate census does not make it so. Although it seems to be the case with, you would think that's the case with his unilateral cutting or shutting down of certain executive agencies. And you would also say the same thing about his sort of just whole cloth creation of the Doge people or whatever. You would say that about that stuff, right? Just because he says it does not make it so. But for a lot of those, it sort of did making it so. So I'm mostly on the side of this person in their analysis, but also the point they said earlier were like, you never know. The Supreme Court has sided with Trump on high-profile cases that consolidate his power. Like, I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, this seems just incredibly short-sighted and just sort of perfectly indicative of how this administration is handling just governance in general, right? They're just not hiding the ball anymore. Any cynical, weird, bad faith reasoning that they had behind other pieces of legislation in the past, they're no longer hiding behind the plausible deniability. They don't have to anymore. So with something like this, they don't even need to come up with some complicated reasoning as to why undocumented or illegal immigrants need not be on the census. They don't even need to pretend. They can just be totally straightforward about it. Like, we just want more states. We just want a gerrymander, guys. Come on. We have the Supreme Court, we have the House, we have the Senate, we have the presidency. Come on, guys. We can gerrymander to all heck. Let's make it happen. Trump on Texas redistricting. We are entitled to 5 more seats. So yeah, Trump is basically outright calling for the gerrymandering of Texas congressional districts. Now, my understanding about how congressional districts are drawn, there are certain rules about how the districts can and can't be drawn. One of the rules is that it can't be drawn explicitly on racial lines, right? You can't have a district come out and be like, you can't have the state of Texas be like, all right, we're going to purposefully try and redistrict all black people together and then all the Hispanics together and then all the whites together, so to consolidate the power for one of these groups over the others. They're not allowed to do that, and there's a whole bunch of complicated analysis that can be done to determine whether it meets the threshold of racial bias or not. And obviously, to the extent that some of these places want to do that but aren't allowed to, they kind of toe the line and do what they can under the guise of plausible deniability. Certainly. A super weird, annoying loophole to all of this is how technically, right, there are basically no rules there are very few rules about redistricting, right? Because theoretically, within the Constitution, the elections in each state are within the purview of the state, right? The state has quite a bit of leeway about how they implement their elections and certain details around the election they have deference on. Basically, it is not illegal to gerrymander for political reasons, right? It's illegal to gerrymander for racial reasons. It is not illegal to gerrymander for explicitly political reasons. And so knowing this, before it used to be that that would still be untenable, right? Even though it's not illegal, coming out and saying we want to redistrict for explicitly political reasons because we just want 5 more Democratic seats. We just want 5 more Republican seats. No more reasoning than that. Would be untenable. I think at least to some degree, they played hide the ball with that sort of thing, right? They had to try and pretend that's not what they're doing. But Trump's just coming out full pants down, balls in the wind. We want those 5 seats, baby. We don't want Democrats to have them. We want Republicans to have them. He's openly and brazenly calling for Texas to gerrymander in favor of the Republicans. President Donald Trump on Tuesday said Republicans were entitled to 5 more seats in Texas in one of his first public comments on the state's new proposed congressional map. Trump had remained quiet on the state's redrawn map since it was introduced, despite brewing commotion over the Republican partisan gerrymander that prompted dozens of state Democratic lawmakers to flee the state in a last-ditch attempt to block the map's passage over the weekend. We'll cover that in our next story. Yeah, basically, they needed a quorum to get this passed, and the Democratic members of the Texas House and Senate realized that, said this is absolute lunacy and we're not going to be a part of this, and so they fled the state and said, you know what, we're just not even going to we're not even going to give you guys a quorum. A quorum means that they have a certain threshold of the number of actual people's feet on the ground in the Capitol or in the building or whatever when they're holding the vote for the vote to be legitimate, right? Let's say there's 100 members of the Senate and maybe their quorum threshold is 60, right? So if only 50 members of the Senate are there, they can't just pass legislation while the other 50 members of the Senate are there. They need at least 10 more senators to be there to pass, to be able to, to meet quorum requirements and start actually passing legislation. And so that was the idea behind Democratic members of the Texas House and Senate fleeing the state, is to deny them the quorum and deny them the ability to sign this gerrymandered map into law. The map could net Republicans as many as 5 seats in the state. It has triggered an arms race across the country, with Democratic-controlled states, most notably California, pledging to gerrymander their own maps in response. Absolutely. This is the exact kind of response the Democrats have to have moving forward with regards to every political issue, right? As soon as the Republicans come in and upend the table, they completely change the rules, literally throw precedent out the window, decades of precedent out the window. I mean, there is absolutely no reason for the Democrats to cling on to these things while the Republicans are taking advantage of them, right? It's just absolutely insane. Trump. Now I have to do it all in his voice. We have an opportunity in Texas to pick up 5 seats. We have a really good governor, and we have good people in Texas, and no one in Texas. Trump told CNBC's Squawk Box, I got the highest vote in the history of Texas, as you probably know, and we are entitled to 5 more seats. I don't understand. So is his reasoning that because he won by a large margin, he won the presidential election in the general by a large margin, that therefore the congressional maps should be redrawn to give the Republicans more congressional seats in Texas? I don't understand. This is what I mean, right? He doesn't have to come up with any reasonable, plausible, deniable reason, right? He can just say, I just want the seats. It doesn't matter. They don't have to hide the ball anymore. It's totally mask off. Texas Republicans last week unveiled a new congressional map of the state that, if passed by the state's legislature, would boost the party's chance of maintaining control in the House in the 2026 midterms. It came after pressure from the Trump aides to redraw the map, along with the Department of Justice alleging that the previous map could be illegal, even as Trump makes it clear that the redraw is predominantly driven by politics. Scores of Democratic state lawmakers left the state in an attempt to stop Republicans from implementing the map by denying the legislature a quorum. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has repeatedly avowed to expel the absent Democrats from the legislature if they fail to return to the state for its ongoing special session. Trump on Tuesday bashed the departed Democrats, some of whom fled to Illinois on Sunday, calling the situation terrible. So yeah, I mean, I fully stand by Governor Gavin Newsom in California saying that, look, if Texas comes out and openly, brazenly, without any level of plausible deniability, gerrymanders their seats just because they can, just because they have a Supreme Court that's favorable to them and will allow them to do that, then absolutely it is the duty, I would argue. It is the only correct way forward for Democrats in their respective states to do the exact same thing, right? As soon as this sort of thing gets passed in Texas, the rules have changed. The rules have officially, from this point on in American politics, with regards to gerrymandering, with regards to congressional district appropriation, have officially changed, and that the Democrats need to understand that, need to not continue playing 20 or 30 years in the past like they do in so many other issues, and take advantage of this. Play the game of politics from the metagame perspective, from top down. Don't be stuck 50 years in the past with your idea of precedent. You've watched too much of the West Wing TV show, and you just think like everything works like it's supposed to, and you can make deals with Republicans, and the Supreme Court justices are good faith legal actors with just different sort of interpretations of legalness or whatever. It's just no. So yeah, as I mentioned in the last article I just covered, where Trump is openly calling for the gerrymandering of Texas congressional districts so they can get 5 more seats. In response to that, Texas House Democrats break quorum, and they They just leave the state. They just fled the state, so that a quorum is the minimum number of representatives necessary for them to pass a piece of legislation, right? Let's say there's 100 people in 100 representatives in this specific body, and the quorum threshold may be 60. So if you only have 50 there at a time, you can't just pass legislation when the other 50 aren't there, right? You need at least 10 more to be there to meet that threshold of 60, to have a quorum to be able to actually pass stuff. Well, Democratic lawmakers, their only way to stop this hilariously bad faith gerrymandering is to just flee the state. At least 51 House Democrats left the state Sunday, one day after a bill that would dramatically redraw Texas's congressional maps, House Bill 4, passed out of committee in the GOP-led House of Representatives on a party line vote. The House requires 100 members be present to conduct business. And so the quorum threshold for the House in the Texas, it looks like, is 100 people. And the House only includes 88 Republicans. The Democrats' action, known as breaking quorum, effectively brings the House to a standstill and prevents any consideration of HB 4 by the full chamber. Yeah, so they need 12 of those Democratic lawmakers to be back physically in the state, physically in the room that they're doing the vote, for the vote to be legitimate, for them to actually be able to fully pass this legislation, to pass this redrawn redistricting map. House Democratic Caucus Chair Gene Wu blasted Governor Greg Abbott, State Attorney General Ken Paxton, and other Texas Republicans for pressing ahead with redistricting while postponing any action to relieve the victims of last month's devastating flood in Central Texas. Governor Abbott has used this tragedy, taken these families who are grieving, taken these communities who are struggling to recover, and used them as hostages in a political game, Wu said. And what is even worse, their attempts to do this, their attempts to disenfranchise Texans, the tool they are using is a racist, gerrymandered map, a map that seeks to use racial lines to divide hardworking communities who have spent decades building up their power and strengthening their voices. And Governor Abbott is doing this in submission to Donald Trump. Well, okay, I don't know if he's doing it in submission to Donald Trump, right? It's not like Greg Abbott is like this super good faith actor and that he's only being corrupted by Donald Trump and that otherwise he'd probably do the right thing. No. My understanding is Greg Abbott is one of those cynical, not super good faith. You know, he's there because he's there for power, baby. He's there for power. While many of the Democrats have fled to Chicago, others have gone to Albany and Boston, all to cities in Democrat-led states. We may not be at the Capitol, but we're doing our jobs, said State Representative James Tallarico in a statement. We may not be in Texas, but we're fighting for our constituents. Absolutely, yeah. So they're 100%. I would agree. They are representing their constituents for sure. You would have a very, very hard time arguing that they are not representing their constituency by doing this sort of thing. The mid-decade round of redistricting kicked off following intense pressure from President Donald Trump. The U.S. Department of Justice sent Abbott a letter identifying 4 Democrat-held seats representing majority non-white coalitions of voters as unconstitutional racial gerrymanders. Okay, so this is the first time I've seen this in all of this. So their official, we're going to put it on paper because we have to put something on paper reason is that basically that reverse racial gerrymandering has undergone, or I guess it wouldn't be reverse racial gerrymandering. Reverse from what you typically see, right? I guess they're arguing that in some of these states, some of these districts, is he seriously arguing that in Texas, that Texas has districts gerrymandered in favor of Hispanic, brown, and black people at the expense of white people? Is that really what the argument they're making? Are they really arguing that whoever drew the last set of Texas congressional district maps did so to gerrymander it in favor, gerrymander against white people is just hilarious to even, bro, come on now. That's just ridiculous. This is so ridiculous. I can't even, oh my God. Oh man. Trump then stated publicly he wanted Texas Republicans to redraw the state's congressional map to pick up 5 seats. We should be in Austin right now, working to support grieving communities devastated by the July 4th floods. that took more than 135 of our fellow Texans, many of them families and children. That's what Texans deserve in the wake of a horrific tragedy, said State Representative Gina Hinojosa in a separate statement. Unfortunately, Republicans, at the request of Donald Trump, have hijacked our special legislative session to launch a blatant and calculated power grab. It's unconscionable and an insult to the flooding victims, survivors, and their loved ones. See, I don't know why this is twice now in these articles that these Democratic lawmakers have referenced these flood victims as like a means, as a reason for why this whole gerrymandering, redistricting, drawing, the whole is bad. But like, that is like, what is with these Democrats and like avoiding making the good case for things, right? The obvious good case, the obvious reason that they should be putting forth is not that it distracts from helping 135 people that died in a natural disaster. It's that you are disenfranchising tens of millions of people that live in the state. That you are cynically, you are upending the table with regards to how we have handled appropriating House power in the country for hundreds of years. It's that this is completely changing the rules of the game so that now moving forward, I would argue probably in perpetuity, that whenever any state, Republican or Democrat, get sufficient control over their state legislature and whatnot, they should gerrymander the heck out of the redistricting maps, or whenever, a census happens and they redraw the districts, they should gerrymander the heck out of it because the Republicans are doing it and they're going to continue to do it. And that you would, in that context, if they're going to be doing it, you'd be stupid not to. You'd be hamstringing yourself if you don't do it. You're purposefully tying your hands and putting yourself at a disadvantage at that point if you don't do it. And so it just seems like that is such a very, very strong, good reason as to why, guys, we can't let them do this. And so we're going to flee the state and we're going to break quorum and we're not going to let them do this, right? That is the reason you should be leading off with, not trying to like point towards these flood victims and be like, oh, but you doing this redistricting instead is distracting from these people. Like, come on, guys. Like, that's just not, like, you're I'm trying to think of the analogy. You're missing the forest for the trees, right? Or what's the saying? You're missing the forest for the trees. Instead of focusing on the actual important thing, you're off distracted by some shiny jingling keys over here, instead of the train that's coming to hit you in the face. Several Republican members, most notably State Attorney General Ken Paxton, have called for the Democrats' arrest. I support the immediate arrest of these rogue lawmakers who've fled their duties, Paxton said on Twitter.com. These radical Democrats are spitting in the face of every Texan they swore to represent. This is cowardice and dereliction of duty, and they should face the full force of the law without apology. Yeah, but would he be there's absolutely, I don't even need to present the fake leading hypothetical question for this. I'm going to state it outright. There is absolutely no way Ken Paxton would be against this if the shoe was on the other foot. If it was the Republicans breaking quorum to stop the Democrats from gerrymandering. There is no way he would be in favor of arresting them. No way. No way. Ken Paxton is one of the most partisan, biased, bad faith actors out there, right? Everything he says seems to be exclusively within the purview and to benefit the Republican Party, and everything else, like, it doesn't matter. He doesn't care about consistency. And that sort of thing drives me crazy because that's all I care about, is making sure all of my political views synthesize properly together and are consistent, that one doesn't contradict the other. But I don't think he cares about that whatsoever. I don't think the Republican Party cares about that at all, really. But especially guys like Ken Paxton don't care about that. Governor Abbott went a step further, calling for the Democrats who had broken quorum to be expelled from their elected offices. This truancy ends now, Abbott said in a statement. The derelict Democrat House members must return to Texas and be in attendance when the House reconvenes at 3 p.m. on Monday, August 4th. For any member who fails to do so, I will invoke Texas Attorney General Opinion Number KP0382 to remove the missing Democrats from membership in the Texas House. The last time Texas Democrats broke quorum was 4 years ago to block the passage of election legislation during a special session. Governor Greg Abbott responded by calling another special session, and the quorum break ultimately collapsed. The MAP legislation passed the House Select Committee on Congressional Redistricting on a party line vote following a day of testimony in which those opposing the measure outnumbered supporters 100-1, a point committee Vice Chair John Rosenthal made. The people of Texas spoke, Rosenthal said. They came out in overwhelming numbers to these hearings. They submitted thousands and thousands of testimonials online, and we saw that 1.2% of the responses were in favor, while 98.8% were opposed. Those numbers are insane. Oh my God. They got 1% of the people to come out in the public comments to be in support of this. That's crazy. I think even true conscientious conservative Texans will know this is a racist attack on black and brown communities, and I won't stand for it. We will continue to fight this with everything we have. Why do they have to make it about race? Come on, bro. Oh, I hate how they talk. So many of these Democrats don't understand what they're doing. They don't understand politics whatsoever, bro. Oh my God. He starts off so well. He starts this sentence off so well. I think even conservative, true conscientious conservative Texans, he's doing so good here. He's doing so good. All he needs to do is finish the sentence with knows that this is wrong, knows that this is pure, this is cynical, this is cynical politics. There's no good faith interpretation of this, that this is just a power grab at the expense of regular people, and that this will have real consequences, that this will have real bad negative effects, knock-on effects. But then he ruins it, and also at the exact same time, I would argue, pushes away large swaths of the white population that don't like it when they hear people say this kind of thing. He says, knows this is a racist attack on black and brown communities. Okay, come on. You don't need to lead with that. That is not the core reason why this is bad, right? The ultimate core reason, if you drill down far enough as to why this sort of thing is bad, is because it undermines our ability to properly function as a society, to properly allocate congressional seats and resources based on the amount of human beings in a certain area, not just whatever politically benefits the Republicans. Yes, they are. The Trump administration is alleging that these districts are gerrymandered against whites, and that in that sense, if they get to change them based on that reasoning, that it will tangibly negatively affect the black and brown communities in these districts more than it will the white community. Okay, I understand that, but that's not the main that is not the core ultimate problem with all of this. You can drill down even deeper than that, and when you drill down even deeper, it's the problems with proper fair representation, with a democracy, with a republic, with a proper one vote equal, having relatively everybody's vote be the same. I just don't think this obsession that a lot of Democrats seem to have with race and racism and whatnot really like does what they think it does. I think this person's comment here, this whole comment that Rosenthal is making, how overwhelming the opposition to this sort of thing when it comes to public comments was, and how his point would be so much stronger if he didn't just undermine it at the end by virtue signaling racism. Like, drill down to you're a lawmaker. Ostensibly, you're smart. You have the ability to do this kind of analysis. Drill down even deeper and talk about the real issue with this, not the second order issue, which is how it's racist and affects black and brown people. Drill down to that proper, full bedrock based level of problem, which is how it undermines our whole system of governance in general. This map intentionally dismantles majority-minority congressional districts in which voters have repeatedly demonstrated the ability and power to elect the candidates of their choice, Turner said. To take that ability and power away is straight-up intentional racial discrimination and a violation of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So yeah, this seems like a totally reasonable thing to do from the Texas House Democrats, the idea that you're going to fire them, or, I mean, look, they've done this in the past before, and a precedent has been established that it is, at least to some degree, okay to do this kind of thing. And they didn't fire them or kick them out of the legislature before or whatever. The idea that you're going to kick somebody out of the legislature for not being there for a vote, for the quorum that you cynically want, is not reasonable. In exactly the same way, if the Republicans manage to successfully politically gerrymander the Texas House, then it is like the duty of Democrats in other states to do the exact same thing, for people like, for California to basically do the exact same thing, to gerrymander itself to ensure more Democratic control in the House. In that exact same way, if like the Texas House legislature, if Greg Abbott and Ken Paxton actually kick certain members of the Democratic House, if they actually kick representatives out of the legislature officially in response to breaking quorum in this kind of way, then moving forward, anytime a Republican in a Democratic-controlled state breaks quorum in the exact same way, they should be fired immediately. They should be immediately kicked out of their position as a representative. If they're gonna, if the shoe's on one foot, it has to be on the other, right? If the rules of the game change, you have to acknowledge the changing of the game's rules and play accordingly. So this came out just 3 hours ago. Texas Senate approves new congressional lines as House Democrats remain out of state. The Texas Senate approved new congressional lines on Tuesday in a rare mid-decade redistricting effort that could aid Republicans in their effort to keep control of the U.S. House of Representatives after the 2026 election. The vote was 19-2, with 9 Democrats absent after exiting the Senate floor moments after the maps were taken up, a show of protest against a framed as a corrupt process. This mid-decade redistricting isn't about fair representation. It's about politicians picking their votes instead of voters choosing their leaders, the Senate Democratic Caucus said in a statement. And it doesn't stop here. If they can gerrymander now, they can and will do it before every election. That's what I was literally about to say, is like, if they do this now, if they even do this one time now, in every single state, moving forward immediately, all of these Democratic states should be saying, all right, guys, before 2026, redistrict and gerrymander it all for our purposes, right? The idea that we need to not pretend that you have to hide the ball and have some level of plausible deniability to your cynical political redistricting has completely gone out the window. And now you have to acknowledge that, right? I'm terrified at the idea that the rules have changed for the Republicans, but not the Democrats, that the Republicans are going to keep doing this sort of bullshit. They're going to redistrict all sorts of states. They're going to politically gerrymander these places, and that the Democrats are not really going to respond in step, right? They might, like in a couple of spots around the edges, maybe sort of respond in a similar way, but I'm worried that the bulk of the Democratic body is just like so stuck in mud. They're so stuck like 30 years in the past with how procedures and how the government is quote unquote supposed to work, that they are just so antithetical to the idea of the rules changing and taking advantage of that, taking this metagame perspective, that they're just going to get walked all over the next decade or so. I'm terrified at the idea of that, because they're a bunch of pussies. The exit wasn't enough to deny a quorum, as their counterparts have done in the Texas House. Dozens of Democrats in the lower chamber have decamped to Illinois and other parts of the country, bringing work in the House to a halt for a second week as the chamber continued to lack the minimum headcount needed to conduct business. Senate-approved map now heads to the House, which must approve the lines. So far, the Democrats' absence has stalled the effort. On Tuesday, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and House Speaker Dustin Burrows said they would adjourn for the session if the lower chamber continued to lack a quorum on Friday. Governor Greg Abbott said he would immediately call a second special session with the same agenda, while teasing the possibility of adding more items. Yeah, my understanding was the first special session was supposed to be about the weed bill that they didn't pass, that got to Greg Abbott's desk, but that he vetoed at the very last second because he didn't like the wording of it or something. My understanding was the original purpose of this special session was he basically was like, guys, I don't like how this THC ban bill is written. I want you guys to reword it, and then in a month from now, we're going to do a special session and actually get it properly passed. But it seems like they've co-opted the purpose of this special session for this political gerrymandering that Trump has imposed upon it. Texas Republicans began to push for new political boundaries after President Donald Trump's team insisted state lawmakers who were initially wary take up an opportunity to gain more GOP seats in Congress. The Senate-approved map is identical to the initial draft introduced in the House. After the proposal was approved by a House committee, Democrats in the lower chamber left the state, depriving the chamber of the required number of lawmakers to pass legislation. The so-called quorum break stalled the map from passing the full House. Democrats in other states, including California Governor Gavin Newsom and New York Governor Kathy Hochul, have also promised their own retaliatory redistricting if Texas passes the new map. Republicans in Texas have taken an offensive stance on the quorum break, with Burrows signaling civil arrest warrants for the missing Democrats. Abbott and Attorney General Ken Paxton have also requested that some members be expelled from their seats by the state Supreme Court. Missing members are also facing $500 a day fines for their absence. If they are successful in expelling certain Democratic members of the Texas House because they did this whole quorum thing, then the rules of how quorums are handled moving forward has changed, right? And that from that point on, anytime a Republican in a Democratic-controlled state tries to break quorum, that you can kick them off of the legislature. In crafting new districts that would likely elect Republican representatives, the proposed map could also pit incumbent Democratic representatives against one another in some districts or risk them losing their seats in others. Under the new map, areas represented by progressive representatives Greg Cesar and Lloyd Doggett would both be under the new District 37 currently held by Doggett. Okay, so it appears based on this article that the quorum is still on, that the quorum break is still on, and that this is the redistricting map unsurprisingly passed the Senate, the Texas Senate, but it hasn't passed the Texas House. I just wonder because this article points out the last time that the Democrats broke quorum in Texas was about 4 years ago. And as a response, they broke the quorum for a special session, and as a result, Greg Abbott or whoever was the governor at the time just called for another special session, by which that time the quorum break had sort of dissolved, and they were able to get a full quorum and get the legislation they wanted to get passed. I wonder if with Trump in office and with this whole sort of new Republican ethos that we've seen over the last few years, that they're going to take a more aggressive stance against the House Democrats and actually try and do something crazy like kick them off, remove their representative status and kick them out of the House or whatever. I'm just wondering if maybe they're going to try and take that next step and do that instead of just waiting until the next special session. I imagine that waiting until the next special session is probably just going to work like it did last time, and that ultimately this whole effort by the Democrat members of the Texas House is just a stalling effort, and that it will eventually get passed. It will likely eventually get passed through, whether it be now or a month from now or 6 months from now. But that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. It's still absolutely something worth doing. And yeah, so we'll just see where this ends up over the next couple of weeks, couple of months. So RFK Jr., the head of the Health and Human Services Department of the U.S. government, officially just cut $500 million worth of federal funding for mRNA vaccine development. I don't know if this was all of the allotted mRNA vaccine development research money that was allotted. I don't know if maybe there's some other amount that they have allowed that they've said is okay, but my understanding is that this is practically all, if not literally all, of the funding that the U.S. government has been giving or is planning to give towards mRNA vaccine research, which is terrifying because my understanding is that just a quick brief thing, my understanding is that the mRNA vaccine, that the speed at which we were able to get it through and the medical miracle that is the mRNA technology and our ability to create a COVID vaccine so quickly saved somewhere in the ballpark of 14 to 15 million people's lives across the globe. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s decision to terminate $500 million in federal funding for mRNA vaccine development threatens to unravel one of medicine's greatest recent achievements. His claim that these vaccines fail to protect effectively against upper respiratory infections like COVID and flu represents a fundamental misunderstanding of vaccinology that could cost lives in future pandemics. Yeah, it's a big shocker that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. isn't exactly a vaccine expert. Who would have guessed, huh? As an infectious disease physician who cared for dozens of critically ill COVID patients in December 2020, I witnessed a remarkable shift in the months that followed. As mRNA vaccines became available in early 2021, severe cases among vaccinated individuals became extremely rare. Deaths were almost exclusively among those who declined vaccination, which was tragic given how preventable these outcomes had become. No vaccine for respiratory viruses had ever provided complete, lasting protection against all infections. Not the flu vaccine, not RSV vaccines. That never should have been the expectation. Some vaccines, like those for measles or polio, can effectively prevent infection and transmission, but these target fundamentally different viruses that don't constantly mutate and reinfect the respiratory tract. The purpose of respiratory virus vaccines is to prevent severe disease, hospitalization, and death. By that measure, mRNA vaccines have been revolutionary. To this point it makes, but these target fundamentally different viruses. My understanding, an explanation I heard from a doctor around the time of COVID for why the idea of a completely 100% effective COVID vaccine is unrealistic is because of the extremely short incubation time of the disease, and that necessarily because of the way virology works, that it would be almost impossible to create a vaccine that fully 100% cures and prevents all cases, because it has such a short incubation period compared to things like polio or measles or something.
These viruses like respiratory syncytial virus, parainfluenza virus, rotavirus, I mean, those are all short incubation period mucosal infections. COVID, another short incubation period mucosal infection. And I think if there's one of the worst things we did early on in this COVID pandemic when the vaccine came out in December of 2020 was not explain that. This is a short incubation period disease, which is to say that you are not going to be protected against mild disease for long. Even if you're naturally infected or vaccinated or both, 6 months later, you're going to be, because antibodies in your circulation will decline, and antibodies are critical in protection against mild to moderate disease, you could get this disease again. And we should have explained that. But we didn't. And I think we didn't because we were desperate to get people vaccinated. In 2021, you were 12 times more likely to be hospitalized if you weren't vaccinated, 12 times more likely to die. And we wanted people to get vaccinated, so I think we overpromised, because people would get the vaccine, and it was mandated, which made people even angrier. And then they would get a mild or moderate infection, which wasn't easy, right? Fever, headache, joint pain, sure, coughing. And they were saying, they lied to me. Here, they told me to get this vaccine and I got sick, but you didn't get hospitalized. And that's the goal. Keep you out of the hospital. Keep you out of the ICU.
The data confirms what I witnessed firsthand. According to research by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, unvaccinated individuals had 53 times the risk of death compared to those who had been fully vaccinated during the Delta wave in 2021. A New England Journal of Medicine study analyzing over 6 million COVID cases found that protection against death remained above 90% and remarkably durable, even as protection against infection declined. Yeah, so and that makes sense. That can partly be attributed to the vaccine, but that can partly be attributed to the way that viruses like COVID necessarily will mutate, right? They are going to mutate in such a way that they become more infectious but less deadly, right? That way that the virus can spread as much as possible. And necessarily the way that virology works, the virus will mutate and select for that sort of thing, right? If the virus continues to get more deadly and it more often kills its host, well, then it's going to less often be spread to other people, and therefore those strains of COVID are more likely, those mutations and strains of COVID are more likely to die off. But the ones that are especially infectious, the ones that spread much more easily than other forms of COVID from person to person, but don't kill the host in the process, are the ones that are going to be selected for the most, the ones that are going to survive, and the mutations that are going to eventually ride out the longest, because that's just the way virology works. So this 90%, so it's a combination, right? The vaccine plays some part in that, but also the way that this sort of disease mutates necessarily plays a part in that. And the way that the disease necessarily will get less deadly but more infectious over time. That's a feature, not a bug. In winter 2020, my hospital's ICU overflowed with COVID patients. Like many colleagues worldwide, I watched patient after patient die despite our best efforts. It was unlike anything any of us had ever seen. By summer 2021, after vaccines rolled out widely, the change was undeniable. Far fewer patients arrived with respiratory failure. Nursing homes saw deaths plummet. As vaccine expert Paul Offit stated in December 2020, all you want to do is keep people out of the hospital and keep them out of the morgue, and I think this vaccine can certainly do that. Even then, before vaccines were widely available, experts understood the real goal. The speed. This is one of the things that frustrates me so much about the people who are like obsessed with Fauci and like how he said the masks would work and then they didn't work or something. It's just like, guys, they're working with they're working with the information that they have, right? And like the idea that they may have misspoke or something and come out and claim that masks work, up to 90%, but then the research shows that they only work up to 60%. It's like, oh, my government's been lying to me. Like, I don't know why that perspective has become so prevalent. It makes no sense to me. It is unfortunate that so many people were sold on the idea that the vaccine or that masks or all of these things combined will be 100% effective, and that anything short of that is unacceptable, right? I think that's in part due to the way that this information was presented to people, but I think it's also in part due to people's lack of curiosity and lack of interest to actually, do the research and look up these details and see if these things synthesize properly together and whatnot. So when they see, Fauci come out and say, mask up, it's going to work, and then they see some other report saying, oh, it might not be as effective as we thought it would be, then they think that their conclusion they come to is government's lying to me and they must want me to get Bill Gates microchips in me or something. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's dumb. The speed of mRNA vaccine development was unprecedented. We went from discovering a new virus to having an authorized vaccine in under a year, breaking the previous record of 4 years. Unlike traditional vaccines that require growing viruses in labs, mRNA vaccines can be designed in days once scientists have the genetic sequence. The impact has been profound. Studies estimate COVID vaccinations saved millions of lives worldwide, with estimates ranging from 2.5 million to 14.4 million. In the United States alone, the Commonwealth Fund found the vaccination program prevented 3.2 million deaths. I would say potentially prevented 3.2 million deaths. Secretary Kennedy's critique that mRNA vaccines fail to protect effectively against upper respiratory infections sets an impossible standard that no respiratory vaccine has ever met. I understand why this distinction can be confusing. Public health messaging hasn't always been clear, and the unfortunate term breakthrough infection made it sound like vaccines had failed when someone got COVID after vaccination. This language was deeply problematic. Getting COVID after vaccination isn't a sign of vaccine failure. The real measure of effectiveness is staying out of the hospital, avoiding serious complications, and surviving what could have been fatal. The scientists who developed mRNA vaccine technology won the 2023 Nobel Prize in Medicine for enabling the development of effective mRNA vaccines against COVID-19 during one of the greatest threats to human health in modern times. Now we're abandoning these proven platforms because it doesn't achieve something no respiratory vaccine has ever achieved. See, this article keeps talking within terms, though, like RFK, the things he says are in good faith, and that this is all just because like this is something we should be extremely proud of, just like Social Security, just like so many other things that our government, just like USAID, just like so many other things that this administration seems to be attacking. We should not be cutting them. We should be extremely proud of the part that every American taxpayer paid in the development of this breakthrough, this pinnacle, this peak of human medicine that is the mRNA vaccine technology. It goes without saying, but this is just sort of the exact opposite thing we should be doing with regards to mRNA vaccine technology, right? The effectiveness and speed at which we were able to create and implement the COVID mRNA vaccine was an overwhelming success and should be seen as a model moving forward, and that we should build off of we should build off of what we learned from all of that, not smash it all because of Bill Gates microchip conspiracy theories and adrenochrome and they got heavy metals in there and they're gonna give you autism and they're turning the frogs gay. That's seriously where all of this is coming from. It's coming from conspiracy theories based in absolutely nothing. It's the idea that these vaccines are not actually there to try and help people and prevent infectious disease or whatever, but to control people in some weird way, some weird convoluted way. The HHS decision affects 22 projects worth nearly $500 million, dismantling infrastructure critical for future pandemic response. Secretary Kennedy promises to invest in safer, broader vaccine platforms and mentions whole virus vaccines. but mRNA vaccines have been administered billions of times globally with an excellent safety profile. More concerning, traditional vaccine approaches are far slower to develop. The beauty of mRNA vaccines is that they can be updated within months when viruses mutate or new pathogens emerge. This decision reinforces the false narrative that vaccines failed unless they completely prevent infection. It sends a troubling message to scientists. Why invest in novel platforms if political ideology can defund them despite their success? When the next viral threat emerges, and it will, we may not have the rapid, flexible response that mRNA technology offers. This means slower vaccine development and more lives lost. Vaccines aren't some niche drug. We're talking about medicines that apply to literally every human being on the planet. We should have learned from the COVID pandemic that everyone is potentially susceptible to pandemic threats. The scientific consensus is clear. mRNA vaccines saved millions of lives and could save millions more in future emergencies. It's been less than 5 years since SARS-CoV-2 killed millions worldwide and overwhelmed health systems globally. To abandon the very technology that got us through the crisis is not just short-sighted, it's reckless. And supremely stupid and based in absolutely no real information or logic, but wholly in conspiracy theories like Bill Gates microchips in the vaccines and heavy metals and adrenochrome, and they're making the frogs gay and blah, blah. Federal mRNA funding cut is, quote, the most dangerous public health decision ever, expert says. Many public health experts and scientists say they are stunned by Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s decision to cancel nearly $500 million in federal funding for future vaccine development. mRNA technology was central in the battle against COVID and can be developed more quickly than traditional vaccines. Geoff Bennett discussed the implications with Dr. Michael Osterholm. So this is, I think this is a dialogue back and forth between like a reporter and an infectious disease expert asking some sort of detailed questions about the implications of this funding cut and whatnot. And so I'm just going to sort of read it and see how it is. So I want to start with your overall reaction to this. How critical is mRNA technology, and what does the loss of this funding mean for future vaccine development? Well, let me just set the stage. I have been in this business for over 50 years on the front lines of public health. I have served 7 different presidential administrations advising them, and I have been through several pandemics. And I can say unequivocally that this was the most dangerous public health decision I have ever seen made by a government body. It's really a very, very significant challenge for us. Why is it important to have mRNA vaccines? Where else do they show promise? Well, first of all, we have all just been through a pandemic, and we did see what, in fact, the COVID vaccine could do to reduce serious illness, hospitalizations, and deaths. But the other kind of pandemic that we're very concerned about, and you noted in the lead-in with regard to bird flu and the possibility that it could be the next influenza pandemic virus. Right now, globally, we have the ability to make enough vaccine in about 15 months after an influenza pandemic started to actually vaccinate only about 1/4 of the entire world. We're still using the 1950s process, using embryonated chicken eggs to grow the virus in. That would be an utter failure. Now, with the mRNA technology, we believe we could probably have enough vaccine for the whole world within a year, and it would make a big difference. This is a vaccine that would surely be every bit as equivalent of what we currently have, if not better. So there's just one example of where mRNA technology can be helpful. We have a number of infectious diseases right now, including some cancer vaccine work that is being done with mRNA technology. And I think the thing that was most challenging yesterday with regard to Secretary Kennedy's announcement was how he just blatantly said the risks outweigh the benefits without providing any of those data or providing who it was that actually supported that within the administration or in the scientific community. Well, on that point, Secretary Kennedy said that the mRNA vaccines don't work against respiratory viruses. Here's a bit of what he had to say. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Health Secretary, blah, blah, most of these shots are for flu, quote, most of these shots are for flu or COVID, but as the pandemic showed us, mRNA vaccines don't perform well against viruses that infect the upper respiratory tract. Here's the problem. mRNA only codes for a small part of the viral proteins, usually a single antigen. One mutation and the vaccine becomes ineffective. So what does the science actually show? Well, what happens is Mr. Kennedy continues to use words that make it sound like he knows what he's talking about, but in fact, he doesn't. We know in the pandemic that the COVID vaccines were good, but not great. No. Did they stop everyone from getting infected? No. Did they stop everyone from transmitting the virus? No. But they did, in fact, greatly reduce the number of people who got seriously ill, people who had to be hospitalized, or people who died. They were outstanding in that regard. But that's the same way it is with our current flu vaccines that we have. Even though they're not mRNA, we have the same thing with seasonal flu. So any respiratory virus is going to be a challenge and not based just on this technology. And whereas Mr. Kennedy also alluded to that somehow these vaccines drive the virus to change, again, simply not true. So to the average citizen hearing this, they're going to say, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't get that. And remember, we know very well vaccines are important, but they're nothing until they become a vaccination. So what he also did yesterday, besides cutting this research out, he just created more doubt in the minds of the public about these vaccines, which is absolutely a horrible, horrible situation. Well, you and other public health leaders, as I understand it, are launching an organization called the Vaccine Integrity Project. What's the goal? Are you trying to create an alternative framework by which to inform the public about vaccines? Well, typically, where what happens in a given seasonal vaccine recommendation, such as we see in the fall with COVID, RSV, and influenza, the medical societies, those in the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Infectious Diseases Society of America, etc., take the information that the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices has generated, extensive work to go back and to look at all the studies that have been done from the previous evaluation point to the current time. And they're not doing that this year. And so what our project is all about is we have 25 of the best and brightest minds from people from around the country. And we have now come together, evaluated over 17,000 abstracts of information, put this together, and we will be issuing in the next several weeks a full report showing what do we now know from a scientific standpoint about the safety, the effectiveness, the overall ability to use these vaccines that won't be based on this kind of misinformation. Based on that, then the societies that will then make their recommendations surely have a database now upon which they can rest their case and say, this is why we're making this recommendation. You know, these cuts add to the mounting evidence that Secretary Kennedy is pursuing an aggressive anti-vaccine agenda. What are the risks? Well, they're incalculable, just because of the fact we're talking about potentially not just a few deaths. We're talking about many, many, many deaths that would occur. We worry desperately about his ongoing legacy of just unilaterally deciding, I'm going to know more than you, therefore I'm telling you, this is what will be available and what it will not be. And you may recall in the hearings that they had for this confirmation, he promised Senator Cassidy he would not take vaccines away from anyone. And he's doing that already. He's already taken them away from pregnant women for COVID, which we know is a very high-risk period for severe COVID. He's taking it away from young children. So this is a systemic move to just continue to erode the availability of these vaccines. This is not about politics. This is about people's lives. This is about our kids and grandkids. Every grandparent, every parent in this country right now should be absolutely alarmed by what's happening and whether or not their children or their grandchildren are going to have access to these vaccines in the days ahead. I think it's an open question. So yeah, it seems like the scientific and medical potential for the mRNA technology is tremendous, and that the success of the COVID vaccine insofar as it prevented major hospitalizations and deaths was a huge data point that we should be taking moving forward, and we should be significantly expanding our research into mRNA technology and the ways that it could potentially improve other aspects of medical technology, right? They even mentioned how they're looking into mRNA technology for a cancer vaccine for certain strains of cancer or whatever. So it seems to me like a total obvious no-brainer that that we should continue, and if not only continue, but we should probably increase our funding for research into things like mRNA technology. And something they mentioned at the end, the fact that I don't know anything about this, so I don't know the details, but like, let's say that Robert RFK and the Health and Human Services Department And they said he's already taken them away from pregnant women for COVID, which we know is a very high risk period for severe COVID. So I guess maybe he made some sort of rule or HHS judgment or something saying that we recommend pregnant women don't get the COVID vaccine. But if the Center for Disease Control vaccine expert is saying that there's no good reason for them to be doing that, that makes me think that the reason, and knowing RFK and the weird conspiracy theory worlds he finds himself in, makes me think that the reason why he would not want pregnant women to get the COVID vaccine is because of his weird, unfounded belief that vaccines cause autism. And so he's probably, I almost guarantee you that's where it's coming from, which makes me think that the reasoning behind all of this is coming from weird, unsubstantiated conspiracy theory type reasoning, right? That somewhere deep in RFK Jr.'s worm-riddled brain that he believes that the mRNA technology is actually there is some conspiracy theory connection there that he's not outwardly saying, right? He thinks that the whole Bill Gates microchips thing, they're using it to control you in some weird, convoluted, complicated way that also involves killing millions of people. It's just, I don't know. This is obviously a huge step backwards in the exact opposite sort of thing we need to be doing with regards to mRNA vaccine technology. Alrighty. I think that'll be it for today. It has been Tuesday, August 12th, 2025. I am Michael Winkler, and this has been the Mike Wink Show, or maybe Squeaky Wheel. Squeaky Wheel. Peace out.